I was standing in my tiny apartment in Philadelphia when my father said that, like the word family was a receipt he could cash. My mother would not look at me. My brother Ethan stood behind them, quiet, but not innocent. And for the first time in my life, I did not explain myself. I just said no. My name is Nora Whitfield, and until that week, I thought the worst thing my family had ever done was underestimate me. I was wrong. I grew up in a polished suburb outside Denver, in a house that looked perfect from the street. White shutters, trimmed hedges, a stone path, a porch my mother decorated for every season. People used to say, "Diane, your home is beautiful." My mother would smile like beauty proved something. My father, Curtis, liked that kind of compliment. He liked anything that made people believe we were stable, successful, and worth admiring. Inside the house, things felt colder. The living room was for guests, not for living. The good plates stayed locked behind glass. The family photos were arranged like a showroom wall. Most of them were of my younger brother, Ethan. Ethan in a soccer uniform. Ethan holding a trophy. Ethan standing between my parents on family vacations. Ethan at graduation, smiling like the whole future had been built for him. There were pictures of me too, but fewer. Usually the ones where I looked quiet. That was what my parents liked best about me. Quiet. Easy. Grateful. In our house, love had a ranking system. Ethan's needs were investments. Mine were expenses. When Ethan needed private coaching, my parents paid for it. When I asked for better drawing supplies, my mother told me talent should not depend on expensive pencils. When Ethan broke his phone, Dad said boys were rough on things. When I wore the same winter coat for 4 years, Mom said I should be thankful it still fit. I learned early that my dreams had to be small enough not to inconvenience anyone. But I still drew. I drew houses with hidden rooms, libraries under train stations, gardens inside glass roofs, museums where the walls curved like waves. I did not know the exact name for what I wanted to become. I only knew I loved making places that could make people feel something. My parents called it doodling. My grandmother Evelyn called it seeing. Grandma Evelyn lived about 40 minutes away, near the Boulder foothills, in a small house with faded blue trim and wildflowers that grew wherever they wanted. Her home was nothing like ours. Nothing matched, but everything belonged. There were fabric samples pinned to corkboards, old theater programs stacked in baskets, tiny wooden chairs from stage models, and books about light, memory, architecture, and art. Grandma had spent most of her life designing small museum exhibits and community theater sets. She could take one lamp, one chair, one painted wall, and make a room feel like another century. Every other Sunday, my mother dropped me off there on her way to brunch. She always acted like Grandma was doing her a favor. But for me, those Sundays were survival. Grandma opened the door before I knocked. "There's my Nora," she would say. Not the difficult one. Not the impractical one. Not the one who needed to be more like Ethan. Just my Nora. She kept a drawer for me in her workroom. Inside were pencils, tracing paper, glue sticks, old postcards, scraps of velvet, brass buttons, and little bits of wood from sets she had built years before. She never asked why I saved things other people threw away. She understood that small things could hold whole stories. When I showed her my drawings, she did not give me quick praise and turn away. She studied them. She asked where the light came from. She asked who lived in the room. She asked what someone would feel when they walked through the door. One afternoon, when I was 12, I drew a library hidden beneath a train station. Grandma looked at it for a long time. Then she tapped the paper gently. "You don't just draw places, sweetheart," she said. "You draw what people are missing." No one had ever said anything like that to me. I carried that sentence for years. At home, my parents carried other sentences. Art is unstable. Artists struggle. Dreams do not pay bills. Ethan has focus. Why can't you be more like him? By high school, Ethan had become the center of every family conversation. His grades, his games, his friends, his future. My future was treated like a problem that needed correction. When I told my parents I wanted to study exhibit design, my father stared at me as if I had announced I was running away to join a traveling circus. "Designing rooms for museums," he said. That is not a career, Nora. That is a hobby with rent. My mother tried to sound kinder. We just want you to have security. A business degree would give you options. But I did not want options that made me disappear. I applied to design programs anyway. When I was accepted into a small program in Philadelphia with a partial scholarship, I ran downstairs with the letter in my hand. For one foolish moment, I thought proof would change them. Dad read the first line, then set the letter on the counter. This is not enough money. Mom looked at the tuition sheet. And it is so far away. Ethan, who was eating cereal at the kitchen island, smirked. So you're moving across the country to decorate hallways? I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me. They did not. Dad pushed the letter back toward me. If you choose this, you choose the cost too. That night, I called Grandma from my bedroom floor. I tried to sound calm, but she heard everything I was hiding. Come over tomorrow, she said. When I got to her house, she had made soup and bread. I could barely eat. I told her maybe I should decline the offer. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Grandma listened without interrupting. Then she went to her workroom and came back with an old leather folder. Inside were sketches from one of her first museum projects. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the drawings were careful and alive. I was told this work was silly too, she said, until people stood in the room and cried. She placed her hand over mine. Practical people often mistake safety for wisdom. But a life can be safe and still be wasted. I went to Philadelphia. Not easily. My scholarship covered part of tuition. Grandma helped with the first deposit, though she made me promise not to tell my parents. I worked in the library, then at a cafe, then at a small children's theater that paid almost nothing, but let me learn how to build worlds from plywood, paint, and light. I was tired all the time. There were weeks when dinner was toast, bananas, and the cheapest soup at the corner store. I told Grandma I was fine. She never believed me, but she never made me feel ashamed. Sometimes a grocery card arrived in the mail. Sometimes my school supply account had a credit I could not explain. Once, when my laptop died 2 days before a final presentation, the repair shop called and said the bill had already been paid. Grandma always acted surprised. Well, she would say, kindness has a way of finding the right address. My parents called less often. When they did, they asked if I had changed my mind. Dad sent job postings for office assistant positions. Mom mailed articles about young people regretting art degrees. Ethan got married during my second year. My parents helped pay for the rehearsal dinner, the photographer, and part of the down payment on his first house. When I asked if they could help me fly home for Thanksgiving, my mother sighed. Nora, your brother is starting a family. We all have to make sacrifices. That sentence followed me for years. Ethan had a family. I had rent. Ethan had responsibilities. I had choices. Ethan needed support. I needed to be realistic. After graduation, I stayed in Philadelphia and found work with a small exhibit fabrication studio. We made displays for local museums, libraries, and historical societies. It was not glamorous. I sanded panels, painted fake brick, labeled artifacts, adjusted lights, carried foam walls up narrow stairs, and spent entire days trying to make one corner of a room feel like 1912. I loved it. There is a strange joy in building a space someone may walk through only once, but remember for years. Still, money was tight. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building with radiators that hissed all winter and windows that rattled in the wind. My closet was so small I kept half my clothes in a suitcase. But on my desk, I had one framed note from Grandma. You draw what people are missing. I read it whenever I forgot who I was. Then, one rainy Tuesday in October, my mother called. I knew something was wrong before she spoke. It's your grandmother, she said. She had a stroke. I booked the first flight I could afford, which meant a terrible route, a long layover, and a middle seat. By the time I reached the hospital in Colorado, my parents and Ethan were already in the hallway. Ethan was pacing with his phone in his hand, talking about property taxes. Dad stood near the vending machines, scrolling through care facility websites. Mom hugged me quickly, like she was checking off a task. She's stable, Mom said. But we have to be realistic. I had not even seen Grandma yet. Realistic about what? Dad looked up. Her house. It may need to be sold to cover care. Ethan nodded. It's not like she can live there alone now. Something cold moved through me. She woke up today, I said. Can we wait before selling her home? Dad's jaw tightened. This is why we did not want to discuss it with you first. You get sentimental. Sentimental. That was what they called love when it stood between them and money. When I finally entered Grandma's room, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her hair, usually pinned neatly, lay loose against the pillow. One side of her face had softened. Her hand trembled when I took it. But her eyes found mine. Nora, she whispered. I bent close. I'm here. Her fingers pressed weakly against my palm. Good, she said. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed in Colorado. I slept in a vinyl chair beside her bed. I helped her sip water. I read from the old exhibit catalogs she loved. Some days she was clear. Some days she drifted. My parents visited, but never for long. Ethan came twice, and both times asked if she remembered where she kept important documents. One evening, after everyone left, Grandma asked me to bring a small notebook from her house. The green one, she whispered. In the roll-top desk. I went the next morning. Her house smelled like cedar, dust, and lavender soap. My parents had already started sorting through things. Boxes lined the hallway, labeled donate, trash, review. I hated those labels. A life should not be reduced that quickly. In the roll-top desk, beneath old receipts and fabric samples, I found the green notebook. When I brought it to the hospital, Grandma held it against her chest. A few nights later, she woke just after midnight. The room was dim except for a thin strip of light under the door. Nora, she said. Yes, the blue tin. I thought she was confused. What blue tin? In the desk. False bottom. Brass key under the thimble tray. Her breath caught. Keep it safe. I wanted to ask more, but she closed her eyes. 3 days later, she was gone. She died early in the morning while snow pressed softly against the hospital windows. I was holding her hand. My parents arrived an hour later. By noon, Mom was calling the funeral home. By evening, Dad was asking for a realtor. The service was nothing like Grandma would have wanted. She would have chosen wildflowers, coffee, and old friends telling stories in her kitchen. My parents chose a formal chapel, white roses, printed programs, and a reception with valet parking. People my father wanted to impress shook his hand and said how sorry they were. Ethan accepted condolences like he had lost a benefactor, not a person. After the funeral, we went to Grandma's house. My parents wanted everything cleared before I flew back. It will be easier this way, Mom said. Easier for whom, I did not ask. While they argued over furniture in the living room, I went to the workroom and closed the door. The roll-top desk sat beneath the window. I found the thimble tray. Under it was a small brass key taped to the wood. My hand shook. The false bottom lifted with a soft click. Inside was a blue tin, no bigger than a lunchbox. I slipped it into my bag and covered the compartment again. When I turned, Ethan was standing in the doorway. What are you doing? My heart slammed against my ribs. Looking for some of her sketches. He glanced at my bag. There's nothing valuable in here. I looked around the room where Grandma had taught me how to see. No, I said quietly. I guess not. Back in Philadelphia, I could not open the tin for 2 days. It sat on my desk beside Grandma's note. When I finally opened it, I found a cream envelope with my name written in her hand, several old photographs, folded letters, and a business card for an attorney named Samuel Reed. There was also a note. Call him before you decide anything. I called the next morning. Samuel Reed was older, calm, and not surprised to hear from me. Your grandmother hoped she would have more time to explain this herself, he said. My throat tightened. Explain what? The trust. I thought I had misheard. What trust? He folded his hands. The Evelyn and Arthur Whitfield Legacy Trust. Your grandmother was the grantor. You are the primary beneficiary. The words did not make sense. He explained slowly. My grandfather, Arthur, had helped develop a sensor system used in refrigerated medical transport. Years before he died, his company was sold. The money was divided into several structures. One portion went to my father when he turned 35. One portion supported Grandma. And one portion had been placed in a protected trust for me. The current value was about $3.4 million. I stopped breathing for a second. That can't be right. It is right, Samuel said. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Your father received his distribution 21 years ago. I stared at the screen. How much? Just over $4 million before taxes and fees. $4 million. My father, who told me colored pencils were unnecessary. My mother, who said we all had to make sacrifices. My brother, whose wedding and first house had been treated like sacred obligations. Samuel continued. Your grandmother became concerned by how quickly that money disappeared. There were failed investments, luxury loans, a franchise purchase, and repeated requests for additional help. He opened a folder. She documented everything. Grandma had not been secretive because she distrusted me. She had been building a wall between me and the people who would have taken everything if they had known. The trust had rules. Most of it had to remain invested for years. The rest could be used for housing, education, health, creative work, and a community arts fund in Grandma's name. It could not be assigned to my parents. It could not be borrowed against by Ethan. It could not be dissolved because someone else wanted it. Then Samuel read Grandma's letter. My dear Nora, if you're hearing this, I am gone, and I am sorry I did not get to tell you myself. This money is not a prize. It is protection. Your parents were given enough to build a steady life, but they spent too much of it trying to look successful instead of becoming whole. I do not write this to shame them. I write it so you will not let their shame become your debt. You were never hard to love. You were only surrounded by people who measured love by usefulness. Use this trust to build rooms where children like you can breathe. Use it to make beauty. Use it to stay free. By the time Samuel finished, I was crying so hard I could not speak. For years, I thought Grandma had helped me because I was struggling. Now I understood. She had helped me because she saw the pattern before I had a name for it. 2 days later, my parents found out. On Thursday evening, all 3 of them showed up at my apartment. Dad did not ask to come in. He stepped past me like he still owned any room I stood in. Mom followed, pale and silent. Ethan came last, wearing the wounded expression of someone already preparing to accuse me. Dad held up a legal notice. Were you going to tell us? I found out this week, I said. Mom looked around my apartment at the old couch, the stacked books, the chipped mug on my desk. So this is why she kept secrets. No, I said. She kept secrets because she knew what would happen if she didn't. Ethan laughed once. That's convenient. I looked at him. What do you want, Ethan? His face hardened. I have a mortgage. I have 2 children. Do you know what childcare costs? There it was. The old sentence in a new coat. Ethan had a family. I had choices. Dad pointed at me. You are one person, Nora. You do not need that kind of money. Mom's voice shook. Your brother has responsibilities. So do I. Dad scoffed. To who? Yourself? The room went very still. For a second, I was 12 again, holding a drawing while everyone explained why Ethan mattered more. Then I heard Grandma's voice. You were never hard to love. I stood up. I am not giving you the trust. Dad's face turned red. You selfish little. Curtis, Mom said, but she did not sound shocked. She sounded worried he had said it too soon. Ethan stepped closer. Grandma would have wanted this money to help the whole family. No, I said. Grandma wrote exactly what she wanted. I handed Mom a copy of the letter. She read the first page, then stopped. Dad snatched it from her. As his eyes moved across the lines, anger replaced surprise. This is manipulation. No, I said. This is documentation. He threw the letter onto the table. We will contest it. Samuel said you might. That made him pause. He also has records of your distribution from Grandpa's estate, the loans Grandma gave you afterward, and the letters where you asked for more. Mom sat down slowly. Ethan looked at Dad. What loans? For the first time, my father had no speech ready. The weeks that followed were ugly. My parents hired an attorney. They claimed Grandma had been influenced by me. They claimed she was confused. They claimed I had isolated her, even though I had lived states away for years. Ethan told relatives I had taken advantage of a dying woman. An aunt I had not heard from in 6 years sent me a message that said, "Money changes people." I wanted to reply, "No, it reveals them." But I did not. Some nights, I sat on my kitchen floor and wondered if holding the line was worth losing everyone. Then I remembered I had already lost the version of them I kept hoping would arrive. My friend Marin came over one night with takeout and found me surrounded by legal papers. She read one of Ethan's statements and slammed it onto the table. "They are not just after the money," she said. "They are trying to make you doubt your own story." She was right. That was the hardest part. Not the lawsuit. Not the paperwork. The doubt. When your family tells a lie loudly enough, part of you searches your own memory for ways to make them right. Maybe I was distant. Maybe I should have visited more. Maybe refusing made me cold. But every time that thought came, I opened Grandma's letter. Not because it gave me permission to hate them. Because it reminded me I did not need to hate them to say no. Samuel found witnesses. June Caldwell, Grandma's neighbor of 30 years, gave a statement about my parents pressuring Grandma for money. A former bank manager confirmed the transfers. Grandma's doctor confirmed she had been mentally clear when the trust documents were updated. Then Samuel found the strongest piece of all. A letter my father had written to Grandma years earlier. In it, he admitted receiving his inheritance, admitted losing most of it, and asked her not to tell Diane how bad things had become. When I read that letter, I did not feel victory. I felt grief. My father had not just lied to me. He had built a whole family system around the lie. The final hearing was shorter than I expected. The judge reviewed the trust, the medical records, the financial documents, and Grandma's letters. My parents sat across the room and did not look at me. Ethan looked angry until Dad's letter was entered. Then he looked confused, like he had just discovered he was not the only person who had been promised a version of reality that did not exist. The judge ruled in my favor. The trust stood. My parents' challenge was dismissed. There was no dramatic speech. No apology. Just a few sentences, a gavel, and the sound of chairs moving back. Outside the courthouse, Mom finally approached me. For 1 second, I thought she might say she was sorry. Instead, she said, "I hope it was worth it." I looked at her. She seemed smaller than I remembered. Not harmless. Just small. "It was Grandma's wish," I said. "No," she said. "It was your choice." For once, she was right. It was my choice. And I would make it again. That night, I went back to Philadelphia, unlocked my apartment, and sat at my desk. The trust papers were in my bag. Grandma's letter was beside my lamp. Outside, traffic moved through wet streets. For the first time in months, nobody was asking me for anything. The silence felt strange. Then it felt like peace. Over the next year, I used the trust exactly as Grandma had asked. I did not buy a mansion. I did not quit my work in a blaze of triumph. I paid off my student loans. I moved into a modest apartment with enough light for a real work table. I rented a small studio in an old warehouse where other artists worked late and nobody laughed when I said a room could hold memory. I helped fund a traveling exhibit for children from under-resourced schools. We called it Rooms That Remember. It taught kids how objects, colors, sounds, and spaces can tell stories. At the opening, a little girl built a tiny cardboard room with blue paper walls and a yellow circle for a window. When I asked who lived there, she said, "Someone who needs a quiet place." I had to step away for a minute. Grandma would have loved her. A few months later, a small gallery owner named Rosa Bellamy asked to show my personal work. I almost said no. Then I thought of Grandma's old sketches and how she had not hidden her dreams from me, even after the world tried to make them small. The show was called Rooms That Remember. I built miniature rooms from my childhood, not as they looked, but as they felt. A dining room where one chair was always brighter than the other. A hallway lined with family photos where one frame was turned toward the wall. A kitchen counter with an acceptance letter lying beside an untouched bowl of cereal. And at the center, a small workroom with a roll-top desk, wildflowers at the window, and a drawer full of pencils waiting for a child who had been told she wanted too much. People stood in front of that piece for a long time. Some cried. Some told me about their own grandmothers, teachers, neighbors, aunts, and friends, the one person who had seen them clearly when their own families could not. That was when I understood the real inheritance. It was not $3.4 million. It was not the legal victory. It was not even the freedom to say no, though that mattered. The real inheritance was being believed before I had proof. It was being loved before I had success. It was one person looking at the part of me everyone else called useless and saying, "That is the part you must protect." I have not spoken to my father in months. My mother sends short messages on holidays. Ethan has never apologized, but I heard from a cousin that he finally asked Dad what happened to the money. I do not know what answer he got. I do not need to know. Sometimes people think healing means the family comes back together. Sometimes it does. But sometimes healing means the story stops bending around people who refuse to tell the truth. I still keep Grandma's note on my desk. You draw what people are missing. For years, I thought I was missing my family. Now I know I was missing a place where love did not require me to disappear. So I built one. Not just for me. For every child who has been told their dream is too expensive. For every daughter treated like an afterthought until she becomes useful. For every person who has heard the word family used like a lock on the door. Grandma Evelyn gave me money, yes. But more than that, she gave me a key. And this time, I used it to let myself out.